Welcome to another video about the most bizarre secrets and events in history. You may think you know everything about the church, but trust me, what you're about to hear will shatter everything you thought you knew. From papal kidnappings to holy feuds and outrageous scandals, these are the stories they tried to bury. In today's video, you'll discover 8 shocking Vatican scandals that will make you question everything about the church. So grab your popcorn, because things are about to get weird, wild, and downright shocking. And hey, if you want more jaw-dropping facts that will make you question people's sanity, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join in the madness. You won't want to miss what comes next. The dead pope who was tried and lost. No, this isn't a horror movie. This is history. Picture this: a courtroom, a judge, a jury, a defendant. But the defendant isn't talking. He's not even breathing because he's been dead for months. In the year 897, something truly grotesque happened in the Vatican. Pope Formosus, who had been dead for almost a year, was dug up, dressed in full papal robes, and put on trial. His lifeless body sat on a throne, his skeletal hands resting limply in his lap, while a living pope shouted accusations at him. The man behind this macabre spectacle, Pope Stephen VI, and let's just say he had issues. Formosus had been pope for 5 years. Then he died peacefully, or so he thought. Stephen VI, his successor, and apparently his greatest enemy, wasn't going to let a little thing like death stop him from seeking revenge. Stephen had Formosus exhumed, dragged into a courtroom, and forced to stand trial for crimes like, well, being pope when Stephen didn't want him to be. The corpse, of course, didn't defend itself. So Stephen appointed a deacon to literally speak for the corpse. Imagine that poor guy, nervously pretending to be a rotting corpse, answering legal questions in a deep zombie-like voice. The verdict? Guilty? The sentence? Here's where things get even worse. Stephen ordered Formosus to be stripped of his papal robes again, his fingers, the ones he used to bless people, cut off, and his body thrown into the Tiber River. Because apparently desecrating a corpse once wasn't enough. But this is where karma kicks in. A few months later, Stephen VI was deposed. The people of Rome didn't like his antics. He was arrested and then mysteriously strangled in his cell. And what about Pope Formosus? His body was fished out of the river and secretly reburied by monks. A new pope later declared his trial a sham and restored his honor. But the damage was done. The Vatican had already staged one of the most insane and disturbing court cases in history. The papal election that took so long that they tore the roof off. A room locked, sealed off from the world. Inside, powerful men argue. Days pass, then weeks. The air grows thick. The tension unbearable. These men have been trapped for so long that someone decides to rip the roof off the building just to make them hurry up. No, this isn't some medieval reality show. This really happened in the Vatican. The year was 1268. The Catholic Church had a big problem. The Pope was dead. A new one needed to be chosen. The cardinals gathered in the city of Viterbo, locked themselves inside a palace, and began voting. They debated, they negotiated, they whispered in corners, and then nothing. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Still no new pope. The townspeople waited patiently, then impatiently, then furiously. Because here's the thing, without a pope, the church was in chaos. And what about those cardinals? They were just sitting there taking their time. So the people of Viterbo came up with a creative solution. First, they locked the doors from the outside. No one leaves until a decision is made. Then they cut off the food rations. At first, the cardinals didn't mind. They had plenty of supplies, but soon the supplies ran out. Famine set in. Still no pope. That's when the people really lost their patience. They climbed onto the roof of the palace and without warning started tearing it off. And guess what? It worked. Shortly thereafter, the cardinals finally agreed on a pope, a man named Gregory del X. Had they learned their lesson? Actually, they had. This debacle led to a major change in papal elections. From then on, conclaves had stricter rules to avoid another months-long debacle. When the Pope had an army of pirates. Picture this, A fleet of ships sails under the Pope's flag, but these aren't peaceful missionaries. These are pirates, real pirates, vicious cannon-firing, gold-plundering pirates. And they weren't attacking the church's enemies for the faith. They were in it for the plunder. Yes, there was a time when the Vatican had its own navy, and it was full of corsairs. Holy war, or holy plunder. The story begins in the 16th century, when the Mediterranean was a chaotic battlefield. The Ottoman Empire was expanding. Christian Europe was in a panic, and the Pope, he needed an army. But here's the twist. Instead of noble knights or pious warriors, the Vatican recruited mercenaries from the sea, men who live by one rule: take all, leave nothing. These weren't your typical soldiers. They were former criminals, rogue captains, and seasoned pirates who had spent years plundering ships. Now, they were fighting under the orders of the Vatican. Well, sort of. Officially, they were part of the Papal Navy, designed to defend Christian lands. In reality, they did whatever they wanted. They attacked Ottoman ships. They raided Muslim coastal cities, but sometimes they got a little too enthusiastic. One day they were fighting for the church. The next they were robbing Christian merchants because, well, old habits die hard. It got so bad that at one point the Pope himself had to send letters begging his own pirates to stop stealing from Catholics. And then came the ultimate act of irony. Some of these so-called holy warriors ended up turning against the Vatican. They switched sides, joined Muslim corsair fleets, and began raiding Italian cities, including those under papal rule. Pope had armed them. He had trained them. He had given them ships. And now, they were using those same weapons against him. The Pope who threw a party where the prize was unlimited sex? What? The Vatican, a place of prayer, devotion, and solemn ritual. A sanctuary of faith. But on one particular night in 1501, it was something else entirely. Candles flickered, goblets overflowed with wine, and in the heart of the apostolic palace, the most infamous party in papal history was about to begin. This was the banquet of chestnuts, and this was no ordinary party. This was a competition, a contest of flesh, and the grand prize, unlimited access to the Vatican's most exclusive pleasures. At the center of this debauchery was Pope Alexander VI, also known as Rodrigo Borgia. If that last name sounds familiar, it's because the Borgia family was basically the Renaissance mafia. Power-hungry, ruthless, and morally flexible. Alexander VI was no typical pope. He had multiple mistresses. He fathered multiple children, all while he was still pope, and he treated the Vatican as his own personal pleasure palace. But nothing could top the night of October 30th, 1501. That was when Alexander Sag, his son Cesare Borgia, and his daughter Lucrezia Borgia hosted an event so debauched that even historians hesitated to write about it. The evening began as usual, a grand banquet, fine wines, lavish decorations. Then the doors opened. A group of 50 prostitutes entered the hall. They began to dance, to undress, to entertain the powerful guests. But that was just the warm-up. As the evening wore on, candles were placed on the floor. Chestnuts were scattered around them. Terente challenge. The women had to crawl on all fours like animals, picking up the chestnuts in their mouths while the nobles watched. Then the real competition began. The men were invited to participate in a competition to see who could perform the most. Acts before sunrise. And to make things even more interesting, the Pope himself promised extravagant rewards. Fine silks, gold, and of course, more women to the winners. By dawn, the hall was a mess. Bodies tangled in silk sheets. Candles melted into puddles. The floor was covered in chestnut shells. And the Pope? Completely unfazed. To him, this was just another night, another display of power, another reminder that in his Vatican, he made the rules. What else happened behind those Vatican walls that history has never dared to record? The cardinal who tried to become pope, with Satan's help, power. Some people would do anything to get it. Lies, treason, murder. But one man? He took things a step further. He tried to summon the devil himself to help him become Pope. Yes, that really happened. And no, it didn't go as planned. In 1623, the Catholic Church was at a crossroads. Pope Gregory XV had just died, and the cardinals gathered for a conclave to choose his successor. The stakes? Higher than ever. The Vatican was not just a religious institution, it was a kingdom. The Pope controlled armies, wealth, and the fate of nations, and every cardinal in that room wanted the throne. Enter Cardinal Gianfrancesco Guidi di Bagno. He was ambitious, cunning, and apparently he wasn't above calling in some hellish reinforcements. As the conclave dragged on, Gianfrancesco grew desperate. The votes were not in his favor. Whispers in the hallway said he would never win. So according to Vatican records, he turned to the occult. Late one night, behind locked doors, Gianfrancesco supposedly performed a ritual, an invocation of demonic forces. The goal, simple: summon a demon, make a deal, become Pope. Candles were lit, incantations were whispered, symbols were drawn in secret, and then nothing. No thunder, no shadows crawling across the walls, no mysterious voices offering a sinister contract. Satan, it seemed, had no interest in Vatican politics. Word of the ritual somehow leaked out. Maybe a servant overheard him. Maybe one of his co-conspirators got scared. But soon, the whispers turned to accusations. Gianfrancesco was confronted, and let's just say he didn't have much of an explanation. He was immediately disqualified from becoming Pope. The other cardinals voted very quickly after that, electing Pope Urban VIII. And Gianfrancesco? He mysteriously disappeared from Vatican politics. Some say he was exiled. Others believe he was quietly removed. But one thing is certain: he was never seen anywhere near a papal election again. The papal election that turned into a medieval cage fight, the Vatican. A place of wisdom, of solemnity, of holy men gathered in deep prayer. At least that's how it was supposed to be. But in 1644, something very different happened. The cardinals weren't praying. They weren't arguing theology. They were throwing punches. And yes, one of them was literally stripped naked in the process. This was the papal election that turned into a medieval MMA fight. It all started with the death of Pope Urban VIII. Normally, when a pope dies, the cardinals gather in conclave to choose the next one. They pray, they debate, they vote, but not this time. This time, they fought. You see, 1644 was a powder keg. The Catholic Church was a political superpower. And this election, it wasn't about faith. It was about control. Two factions emerged. On one side, the pro-French cardinals. Backed by France, they wanted a pope who would strengthen their empire. On the other side, the pro-Spanish cardinals. Backed by Spain, they wanted a pope who would crush French influence. And neither side was willing to lose. At first, it was just heated arguments, then shouting, then threats, and then someone threw a punch. What followed was pure chaos. Cardinals throwing themselves at each other, robes flying, fists swinging, a holy brawl right inside the conclave. At one point, a cardinal was tackled so violently that his robes were ripped off, leaving him naked in the middle of the fight. Imagine that. A future pope could have literally been chosen while standing next to a bruised, bare-assed cardinal. Guards had to physically break up the fight. The conclave was put on lockdown. Tensions remained high, but after weeks of madness, a victor emerged, Pope Innocent X. Ironically, innocent was probably the last word to describe what had just happened. The time Napoleon kidnapped the Pope, and he became a hardcore gambler. In 1809, Napoleon Bonaparte, yes, that Napoleon, decided he didn't just want to conquer Europe. He wanted to kidnap the Pope, and that's exactly what he did. But here's the really weird part. While Napoleon was off rewriting the map of Europe, Pope Pius VII was locked away, playing cards. Yep, the Pope became a hardcore gambler, 19th century style. Pius VII and Napoleon were never exactly the best of friends. The Pope wanted the church to remain independent. Napoleon, not so much. He wanted total control. At first, Napoleon tried to be diplomatic. He invited the Pope to support his empire. but Pius VII refused. So Napoleon, being Napoleon, said, "Fine, I'll take you with me." In the dead of night, French soldiers stormed the Vatican. They captured the Pope, threw him in a carriage, and dragged him around Europe like a stolen relic. For 5 years, Pius VII was Napoleon's prisoner. Now you'd think that being held captive by the most powerful man in the world would break a person, maybe drive him insane, not Pius VII. Instead, he found a way to pass the time by becoming a gaming legend. No, not Call of Duty or Fortnite. This was an old school game. He played solitaire. Yes, the Pope sat alone in his cell, shuffling cards, laying them out, and playing solitaire games for years. And he meant it. Witnesses claimed he would spend hours staring at the cards, planning his next move like a general planning a battle. Then, in 1814, Napoleon made a fatal mistake. He lost a real game, war. He was defeated, exiled. And guess what? Pius VII outlived him. The Pope returned to Rome victorious. And Napoleon? He spent his last years as a prisoner on a small island, probably wishing he had a deck of cards. The Pope who died in the worst possible way. And no one was surprised. Being Pope is supposed to be a holy calling, a life of prayer, wisdom, and a moral integrity. Well, Pope John XIV missed that memo. Why did his reign? It was less about faith and more about gambling, drinking, bribery, and, well, let's just say extracurricular activities. And his death? Let's just say that when they found him, he wasn't exactly holding a Bible. John XIV became Pope in 955 AD at just 18 years old. Yes, you read that right. A teenager was suddenly in charge of the Catholic Church, and he ran the Vatican like a fraternity. He threw wild parties inside the Lateran Palace. He stole money from the church to fund his habits. He turned sacred halls into a brothel. Rumor had it that he blessed people with the sign of the cross, while holding a glass of wine in the other hand. But his favorite pastime? Other people's wives. And that, my friend, is what led to his very unhappy end. One night in 964 AD, John XIV was shockingly not in church. Instead, he was in the bed of a married woman. And then suddenly, he died. Now, how did he die? That's the fun part, because no one could agree. Some say he had a stroke in the middle of the act, as if divine justice had struck him down at the worst possible moment. Others whisper that the woman's husband walked in and finished the job himself. And honestly, both seem equally plausible. Whatever happened, one thing was clear. The Vatican was very quick to move on. John XIV was dead. A new pope was elected, and the church never spoke of him again. So which of these Vatican scandals shocked you the most? Was it the Pope playing cards, or the Pope summoning demons, or the papal election turning into a cage fight? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm curious to hear what you think. And if you want more bizarre stories, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. See you in the next video.